So today I want to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart. It's actually something that I had adapted from Stoicism into my own life. And more than any mind mapping technique that I can teach you, this is probably much more important than that. And I use it pretty much on a daily basis for both my personal and my professional growth. So, and this is understanding the nature of something. Understanding the nature of something. So before I go further into this, I want to read to you a passage from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations to give you some context, as well as how I came up with this concept, which is, it would be absurd to be surprised at a fig tree bearing figs. Equally absurd for a doctor or ship's captain to be surprised at fever in a patient or a headwind springing up. So there are a few things here. Marcus Aurelius is basically saying that it would be crazy for us to be surprised that a fig tree will actually produce figs as a fruit, right? It's just the nature of a fig tree. Just like how a doctor shouldn't be surprised that somebody's going up with blowing up with a fever, or a ship's captain be surprised that the seas are turbulent. So this is another way of saying that if we don't want to be surprised, if we don't want to be caught off guard, we need to understand the nature of something, right? So surprised is kind of a catch-all word for being, afraid, being startled, as well as being overly enthusiastic, right? So anything that is, catching us off kilter, off guard. And the reason for not getting caught off guard is so that we're able to think more clearly about, the thing that we're dealing with, be it a person, a business, ourselves, right? It basically keeps our personal biases in check. And it also forces us to actually slow think, basically system 2 thinking. And it's also the basis of first principles thinking. The ways that I apply it is so versatile. With interpersonal relationships, understanding the nature of something is really key, because when we first meet somebody, or even if we know them for a while, for example, parents or friends, we have a tendency often to have, for example, first impression bias, right? What we see is sometimes not what we get. And we also tend to, or at least for me, I tend to self-project, my worldviews onto the other person, thinking that the other person is very similar like me. And somebody turns out to be, for example, less altruistic than I assumed them to be, which is totally fine. It just means that, I kind of expected one set of actions, but, they were true to their nature in a different way. And that was my misjudgment, because I have self-projected my own worldviews upon that person, right? Whereas if I had understood that to begin with, I wouldn't have been caught off guard, I wouldn't have been disappointed, and I would have known how to actually deal with that person. And I think, the flip side obviously is not all negative at all, right? Sometimes it's actually understanding, someone and accepting them for who they are. And on the work front, I question the nature of the businesses and industries I go into, right? So the nature of a business is their business model. It is how they make money in a capitalistic system. But when I'm trying to get deals done, I take into account, I have to understand their business model, right? What is their market incentive? That is basically their true nature. So if I can understand their business model, then I can communicate in a way that speaks to that nature. So basically how I can help them achieve their monetary objectives, right? You can't do that if you don't understand their business model. The other one is the org structure. A nature of a company sometimes is also their org structure. Is it a flat structure? Or is it a hierarchy they have to understand who are the decision makers, right? Are you even talking to the decision maker? Do they have any power within the organization? And then also, what is the position of the company as a whole in the market? Are they a number one? Are they a number two? Because the way that the number one and number two in a market thinks is vastly different, right? number ones in the market, market leaders often have something to lose. So they might be incentivized to drive ahead, but often they're more in a defensive kind of position where they're trying to defend their market share. Whereas a number two in the market or number three is hungry, right? So in my experience, I've dealt with essentially large international companies, and often the ones, for example, from China for the number two or number three are very, very aggressive compared to their Korean counterparts or Japanese counterparts. They're essentially where those said companies were essentially 10 years ago. They're very hungry, they're very aggressive, and that's their nature. And often you're able to play that into your favor if you understand where their psychology essentially comes from. Again, that's the nature of the company relative to their position in the market. And then finally, there is also the nature of the people and the culture. Having studied in London business school for 2 years, getting my MBA there, we took a lot of cultural classes and also being exposed to all my classmates. In a classroom, we basically looked like the UN, right? There was 70 different countries represented, 50 different languages spoken. So you really get a sense of, for example, the East Asian cultures, personal space, right? The nature of that is that it's a little bit more distant than Latin Americans and Americans in general. So understanding that how people think as a people and a culture is very important of getting deals done too. And that's also brings to a point of identity, like a national identity as well, right? So all of these things are very important to understand the nature of. And then finally, I think about the nature of stuff in the context of society and politics, societal issues, right? So for example, one of the prevalent things I've been thinking about is cancel culture. Cancel culture is, in its essence, it's writing people off without really understanding their nature or the context of something. Canceling somebody is almost assuming that this person is static, is that the snapshot of them that's portrayed by the news is the end-all be-all and they're never going to change. So I think taking the time to actually understand the nature of somebody is almost a safeguard against cancel culture, because then you're trying to understand who they are, their background, what is the context of what they said or did. And at that point, I think it's much better to make your own personal judgment based on what you've researched yourself and what has gone through your head, rather than just taking news at point blank. Which also leads to the question of what is the nature of news, right? That has actually changed over time, where today's the nature of news is actually very much around the polarization and the monetization of opinions, polarized opinions, because that is what's going to drive the revenue models for a lot of the news companies. So understanding the nature of news itself will inform the way that you perceive news also. And at this point, you might be wondering, how do I do it? How do I understand the nature of something? Well, I do that in several ways. First of all, is having an inquisitive or questioning kind of nature, right? Rather than taking things, as given, I will always ask, what is the nature? What is the true nature of something that I'm seeing or hearing? And that line of questioning automatically slows things down. And this is actually kind of related to the Q&A question mind map. If you go down 2-3 levels of whys and questioning of that line of thought of what you're learning, you get a very good practical understanding of this subject. The second one is to listen generously. It's not enough to just question, you actually have to listen, truly listen, and try to understand. So whenever I'm talking to somebody, or if I'm reading a book, as I'm questioning, I am listening, I'm trying to take this in, and I'm trying to formulate, a principle around it. And then I also read a lot of philosophy, because philosophy, at the end of the day, people think about philosophy as text written by dead old men, which is, true. Marcus Aurelius has been dead for almost 2,000 years, right? But a lot of the philosophers, I see philosophy as a living, breathing, ideas essentially that I can apply to life. So philosophy may be old, from old texts and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, like, human wisdom has actually not increased that much. Our human technology, our human power has actually increased exponentially thanks to technological advancements. But wisdom-wise, it's actually relatively unchanged. So reading philosophy asks a lot of fundamental questions. Often it is, questions around like how to be happy, what is the point of life, but it also provides me with a lot of tools to actually, analytically dissect a lot of the issues that I encounter, or a lot of the things that I think about. And finally, on the business front, understanding business models, right? This is like, digging a bit deeper than just the news that you read, the Wall Street Journal or the Times, or TechCrunch if you're in tech, right? But actually digging into deeper analysis from analysts. So for example, Strategy with Ben Thompson is really fantastic. That man definitely understands the nature of the internet businesses. I basically spent a good 6 months of a sabbatical just dissecting all of his writings and recreating his mindset so I can adapt it into my own, become a first principles thinker in terms of in the tech industry. The commonality with a lot of these things is that they're long form reading rather than sound bites that you get in today's world, which is really run by 140 characters and TikTok videos and stories, right? None of which is longer really than 30 seconds at a time. So that's all to say, we got to think deeper. We have to understand the nature of things in order to understand our world in a more objective light, and also to understand each other and have empathy for each other. And this is why I think understanding the nature of things is so fundamental to my own life, and has been really powerful, enriching my life. So I'm very thankful and very grateful to have this opportunity to share this concept with you, because it is so near and dear to my heart. Yes, and let me know if you have any questions or comments below. As always, thank you for watching and understanding and allowing me to share. And until next time, take care and practice understanding the nature of something. All right, see you guys later. Bye.